The Straw King, Chapter 5. It took the lion what seemed like a million excruciating minutes to tear the little munchkin out of the tree. As Scare tended to her cuts, tearing cloth from his own palace finery, he noticed that she was a young female munchkin, dressed in scullery uniform, and was tattered and blood-stained. A purple bruise colored her left eye, and blood still trickled from where a clump of her hair had been torn out of its roots. Her eyes stared up at him, unseeing, and she was trembling with fear. "It's all right," the Scarecrow said as gently as he could. "It's only me." She was too upset to move on her own, so the Scarecrow and the lion carefully carried her away from the path in case another rider or one of Ginger's soldiers appeared. "What happened?" the lion growled. The Munchkin's eyes seemed to focus, and a quizzical expression flashed across her face. "Your Majesty?" She asked, looking from the lion to the Scarecrow. "Is it really you?" "It's me," he assured her. "And my friend the cow—" The lion growled deep in his throat. "The lion," the Scarecrow amended hastily. "What happened? Did you come from the palace?" "Oh, your Highness," the Munchkin wailed, bursting into tears. "It's so, awful. Your Highness, you must come back and help us. Those girls—" She dissolved into sobs, and for several minutes made no sense at all. The lion and the Scarecrow were forced to wait for her hysterical fit to subside, as the Scarecrow patted her awkwardly on the back. She took several deep breaths, finally getting control of herself. "I'm sorry, Your Highness," she said in a low voice. "Only it's so awful what's happening at the palace. Ginger's been killing the servants left and right. She says we're conspiring with the usurper. That's you, sir, begging your pardon. And we have no place in the new regime. I snuck out of the palace in one of the laundry carts and was trying to walk out safely, but Ginger's forces must have set some kind of trap on their way to the palace." It was worse than he imagined. A question, errant and wrong, bubbled up before the images of dead munchkins replaced it. "But how are my books?" He stuffed it down and focused on his poor subjects. He had left them to be slaughtered. Scare spotted the lion, whose mood had turned to vigilance. The lion was crouched in punching mode, and his eyes were darting around the forest ceiling. Scare looked around for the forest, imagining new dangers everywhere. He spotted another web stretching low between two trees, glistening in the waning Oz light. The Munchkin girl began to cry again. "We're only trying to do our job, sir, as we've always done. We don't mind if it's you ruling Oz or the Wizard of Ozma. Our place has always been the Emerald Palace, but now—" Her voice broke. The Scarecrow tried another trick. "Hibiscus Lemon." "You know me?" she asked, so surprised that her tears were forgotten. She looked up at him, her eyes big, blinking themselves dry. "Of course I do. East Wing. Not terribly good with the duster, but a master seamstress, which is of particular importance to a king who is held together by needle and thread." To test his growing intellect, he memorized every Munchkin's name and face, and a few of their attributes. Hibiscus Lemon didn't smile, but her tears stopped falling. That was something. He squeezed her tiny hand gently, and she leaned against him. She weighed less than nothing, but he could feel the weight of her that was lost back at the palace all over again. "This Ginger person is getting more awful by the second," the Scarecrow said quietly to the lion over her little green-haired head. "It's certainly unprecedented," the lion agreed. "Perhaps Ginger saw you as vulnerable." "Me? Vulnerable?" The Scarecrow sputtered. "Of course I needed to get a feel for things still, but I was certainly learning how to do an excellent job as king, and like the book says, she is clearly not in any position to judge me." The lion looked at Scare as if he was trying hard to figure him out. "I never knew any more whether you want me to answer or whether your question is rhetorical, the Scarecrow corrected. The lion shrugged his hulking shoulders as if this somehow proved his point. "Can't you help me, Your Highness?" the Munchkin asked desperately. The lion rose with a sigh. He cast a sympathetic glance at the Munchkin, but then gave Scare a look that said they needed to move. The Scarecrow had no idea what to tell this poor creature. How could he possibly help her? He had to get to the forest of the beast with the lion and find a way to reclaim the throne. But the lion was looking at him intensely, and the teary-eyed Munchkin was staring at him with beseeching eyes. He couldn't just leave her here. The wizard had given him brains. Surely he could come up with a solution to her problem. A spark of inspiration hit him. "Where were you hoping to go?" "To my family, sir." She pointed down the path. "They live in a Munchkin village at the edge of the Forest of the Beasts." The Scarecrow was delighted by this convenient turn of events. "Then we shall escort you there," he said grandly, feeling generous and magnificent. Picking up people to help along a journey reminded him of the trip down to the Road of Yellow Brick with Dorothy, and that had turned out better than they ever imagined. At the very least, he could help this one girl. Hibiscus Lemon nodded, but he could see from her far-off stare that his clever solution hadn't done much to reassure her. Still, he was certain it was just what the wizard would have done, and he was pleased with himself. She was not like him, knowing the next move had lifted a bit of the weight off his straw-filled chest. He assumed that the Munchkin would not feel better until she saw her home again, and was safely in the arms of her parents. The lion did not comment, but the Scarecrow could sense that he approved. Or at the very least he was happy that they were moving and no longer sitting ducks for any of Ginger's army. The three of them set off in the direction the girl had been heading. They saw no more riders on the road, and the Scarecrow wondered if any of the other palace residents had escaped Ginger's forces. He certainly hoped so. The memory of the royal army's trampled body flashed in front of his eyes. It was horrible to think of the same thing happening to other residents of the palace, his people. What if Ginger had killed poor Fiona? Or the sweet Munchkin chef who oversaw the kitchens? "Hibiscus Lemon, did you happen to see Fiona?" He managed as gently as possible. Hibiscus shook her head and opened her mouth, but the effort brought more tears. He wished that she'd answered differently, that she'd seen his favorite little maid escaping to safety. But at least she'd not said that he'd seen her hurt by Ginger. He opened his mouth to ask more, but he closed it again. In this one case, not knowing felt better than knowing, especially when he knew that whatever she had to say would not be good. With Hibiscus Lemon taking the Scarecrow's former place in the lion's back, the journey passed quickly, and soon the Scarecrow could see a small village in the distance. The Munchkin perked up visibly at the sight of her home. "Ma and Pa will be happy to see me," she said, straightening her bloodied dress. "I haven't been home in ages. Everyone's home. You can see the smoke from their cooking fires." But as they got closer, it was obvious something was wrong. "Are those grizzly birds?" the lion asked in a low voice. The Scarecrow looked up. Dark shadows circled and swooped in the air above them. Grizzly birds were hulking and silent creatures, and like other animals in Oz, they didn't speak, which made them all the more terrifying. Not to mention they fed on dead flesh. The Scarecrow shivered. As they drew closer, he could see that the smoke wasn't coming from the chimneys. The thick, dark, oily plumes were rising from the huts themselves. The village was on fire. "Ginger's army was here first," the lion said quietly. "But why?" cried the Munchkin, breaking into a limping run. The Scarecrow's mind raced and came up with a solution. "She said she'd kill anyone who supported me," he said, guilt washing over him with every step to the charred pastel houses. "The Munchkins have always been loyal to whoever sat on the throne. They had no idea she'd kill them for not yielding to her coup. The Munchkins have never been fighters. There's probably not a single weapon in the entire village. They were totally unprepared." "My parents! I have to make sure they're alive," the Munchkin girl sobbed, her blood-stained face now streaked with tears. "I don't have anything left." "Wait," the Scarecrow cried. "For all we know, some of Ginger's soldiers stayed behind to finish the job." The lion nodded in agreement, but Hibiscus tore away from them and ran toward her ruined village. Up close, the destruction was awful. Many of the houses had been burned to the ground, and others were only partially standing. Through the scorched and blackened walls, the Scarecrow could see tables still set for a meal, as though the occupants had just stepped outside. But the charred corpses in the street suggested that none of the Munchkins had gotten far. Scare scanned the faces for ones he knew. None of them worked at the palace. He did not know them. But they were his people all the same. They were his responsibility as king, and now they were gone. The once carefully tended flower beds that lined the road were trampled, and blood had pooled between the paving stones. The lion lowered his head, sniffing at one of the dark puddles. "Still warm," he growled. "The soldiers just passed this way." Ahead of them, Hibiscus screamed. She had sunk to her knees in front of the house that must have been hers, and she wasn't alone. The Scarecrow had been right. They weren't alone in the village. One of Ginger's soldiers had been left behind, and she was holding a knife to the Munchkin girl's throat.